Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday. Welcome to Monday Minutes. What a week ahead. What a weekend. First and foremost, we'll get it out of the way. Ukraine and the United States, Russia, clearly the topic over the weekend. If you go on LinkedIn and you look at the assessment across the board, our assessment, at least here in the United States, is the narrative and the dialogue breaks down along party lines, which quite honestly is unfortunate. But we get it. We always look at these things through an economic prism. Certainly when you look at Europe front and center in terms of increased spending, no one is going to put troops on the ground within the Ukraine. And in the U.S., look, an economic partnership, let's be clear, has already begun because we have given them north of $100 billion over time. So to increase that economic relationship with U.S. incentives would seem to make sense. So this dialogue continuing, we think in the end would be a very constructive thing. Very quickly this week, let's go ISM, today manufacturing, somewhat important because the manufacturing numbers have actually been ticking up here a little bit. But more importantly will be ISM Services later in the week. The consumer appears to have been slowing down here in the first quarter for a number of different reasons. So I think the market's going to be paying close attention to that ISM Services number. Tariffs tomorrow, China, 25%, Canada, Mexico. We don't necessarily agree and get the approach with Canada. We certainly do get it from a national security perspective with regard to Mexico. They could get postponed. We don't know what we don't know at this point, and we're not going to make any assumptions. But having said that, the tariffs with China, 10 on top of 10. And with regard to 25%, if they do get invoked, we do think 25% would be the starting point with the ability for them to actually potentially go down over time. Jobs report on Friday, the Doge effort showing up a little bit in the claims numbers. It probably will take some time here for the Doge numbers to potentially show up within these job numbers going forward. So keep that in mind for Friday. A lot of talk about stagflation, but look, the inflation numbers for the first quarters of many, many years, including the last 2 years, have been seasonal. And in conjunction with that, stagflation, you would generally like to or think to see an uptick in the unemployment rate, and we're just not seeing that right now. Powell later in the week. The market's certainly pricing it a little bit more here in terms of the Fed. We went from almost pricing the Fed out entirely in 2025 to now pricing in and around 2.5 rate cuts for 2025. If that number continues to increase, we're probably going to skew a little bit too far. But I think the market's assessment here that the Fed has the potential to come down a little bit in 25 hasn't really changed. Fed Governor Waller hasn't really changed his posture. What the Fed is saying is, we think we have room to come down, but don't get in love with that notion anytime soon. If anything, you're looking at mid-year to the second half of 2025, unless something materially changes. State of the Union address, we'll get that tomorrow. The president has said he's going to speak very bluntly to the American people, and we certainly think that's been the case so far. In terms of markets in general, huge calendar, corporate calendar. Corporate spreads have been actually okay. The volatility has not been in the corporate market. It's been mainly in the FX market. We've seen pockets of volatility in the equity markets, and we've certainly seen some volatility in the rate markets. On the economy, the Atlanta Fed GDP, of course, that's out there now. Big drop down to negative 1.5 in terms of that reading. We know companies are trying to get in front of this notion of tariffs. So if anything, our trade deficits have moved counter to where, the president wants them to be. So keeping a close eye on inventory buildup potentially and then consumption in terms of what the consumer is doing. But for all intents and purposes, the numbers that we've seen in the first quarter, again, for a number of different reasons, consumer spending seems to be down here. So we'll keep an eye on that. But we have favored rates in this pocket of time. We started nibbling in and around the 2024 yield highs, call it 470, 475. I think we got out to 480. We didn't get to a full position, but we certainly liked nibbling there with the notion of adding if rates had moved beyond 480 and close to 5%. And our target was 4.25. We're in and around 4.25. Moved a little through there on Friday. Certainly, look, we can move a little bit lower here given this pocket and dynamics that we're seeing right now. But as we've learned with this economy, and especially this year, with the change in administrations, you look at tariffs, you look at some of the uncertainty out there, some of the geopolitical uncertainty, it's very hard to translate that bigger picture vision. Sometimes very hard to translate that down to a corporate and consumer level, probably a little bit easier on the corporate level, but from a consumer level, certainly tentative in nature here, with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of stuff getting done at the same time. But it's a long year, and we're only 2 months in, starting a third month. It was likely going to be bumpy, perhaps a little bit messy as we headed out into 2025. And that's what we're getting. And the last thing will be the deficit, right? It's the budget resolution heading to the Senate, the process of reconciliation and working through that, how those numbers lay out. There is certainly a spirit of cutting back when you look at DOGE, certainly a spirit of cutting back when you listen to Treasury Secretary Bessent. But the reality is, how do these numbers actually shake out? What does it look like from a deficit perspective? And to me, the market is saying all that we know, all that's priced into the market here, not entirely comfortable necessarily that these deficit numbers are going to come down meaningfully in the months and perhaps year ahead. Wishing everyone a great week ahead. There's plenty on the table. I'm Greg Faranello. I'm head of U.S. rates for AmeriVet Securities.